She thought I'd understand her emotional cheating. Instead, I left, and now her life is collapsing around her. 7 years of marriage doesn't prepare you for the moment when a career opportunity becomes the fault line that splits everything apart. I'm Nathan, 31, a civil engineer who'd spent the better part of a decade building what I thought was an unshakable foundation with Emma, and until 3 months ago, we were the couple people pointed to as proof that marriage could actually work. We lived in Denver, had a renovated craftsman bungalow in Capitol Hill, hosted dinner parties where Emma's homemade focaccia impressed everyone, and maintained the kind of easy partnership that made other couples envious. She ran her bakery, I designed municipal infrastructure projects, and we supported each other's ambitions without keeping score. That equilibrium shattered the evening I came home with news about the Seattle promotion, walking through our front door with takeout Thai food and genuine excitement about an opportunity I'd been working toward for 3 years. Emma was at the kitchen island reviewing supplier invoices for her bakery, Pearl and Provisions, the artisan bread shop she'd opened 3 years earlier after leaving her corporate marketing job to pursue what she called her actual passion. I set down the food and told her about the offer: senior project manager, 35% raise, leading the team designing a new light rail expansion, and watched her face shift from curious to guarded in the span of a breath. Seattle, she repeated, setting down her pen with deliberate care. When would this start? I explained the timeline. They wanted me there by early September, which gave us roughly 4 months to make arrangements, sell the house if needed, figure out the logistics like we'd always done when life threw us curveballs. Emma's bakery had a solid customer base, but artisan bread wasn't exactly location dependent. She could rebuild in Seattle, maybe even expand with the lower commercial rents compared to Denver's inflated market. I'd already researched neighborhoods, found areas with food scenes that would appreciate her sourdough and laminated pastries, even located a commercial space near Pike Place that was available for lease. I'm not moving to Seattle, Emma said, her voice flat and final in a way that caught me completely off guard. Pearl and Provisions is finally profitable, Nathan. I have standing orders from 4 restaurants, a waiting list for my weekend pastry boxes, and I just hired my second employee. I'm not throwing that away to follow you to a city where I'd have to start over from nothing. The conversation devolved faster than I could process. I pointed out that this promotion represented the culmination of years of 60-hour weeks and weekend site inspections, that senior positions in my field didn't appear often, that we'd always agreed career opportunities were family decisions rather than individual vetoes. Emma countered that I'd sprung this on her without warning, that she'd invested everything, her savings, her time, her identity, into building Pearl and Provisions from a dream into an actual business, that asking her to abandon it proved I'd never truly valued her work the way I valued mine. I'm not asking you to abandon anything, I said, keeping my voice level despite the frustration building behind my sternum. I'm asking you to consider relocating a business model that can work anywhere. You're selling bread, Emma, not running a factory with unmovable equipment. The customer base is the only thing tying you to Denver, and you built that once. You can build it again. Her eyes went cold in a way I'd never seen during 7 years together. You think it's that simple? That I can just pack up my commercial ovens, leave behind the reputation I've spent 3 years building, and replicate it in a city where nobody knows my name? You don't respect what I do at all. This is just Emma's little bread shop, to you. Something cute and expendable compared to your important engineering career. The accusation stung because it was fundamentally unfair. I'd supported her bakery from the beginning, provided the initial $30,000 investment when banks wouldn't touch a culinary startup, handled all her business accounting and tax preparation, showed up at 4 a.m. on farmers market mornings to help her load the van. I'd never diminished her work, but I also refused to accept that 4 months of planning couldn't yield a solution that honored both our careers. We argued for 2 hours that night, the Thai food growing cold on the counter while we circled the same points with increasing hostility. Emma claimed I was being selfish and inflexible, prioritizing my ambitions over our life in Denver. I argued that refusing to even discuss compromise was its own form of selfishness, that marriages required both people to make sacrifices sometimes, and that a flat no, without exploring alternatives wasn't how partners behaved. Maybe I don't want to be the partner who always bends, Emma said, her voice rising with each word. Maybe I'm tired of being the flexible one, the understanding one, the wife who smiles and adapts while you make the big decisions about our future. I stared at her, genuinely confused about what she meant. When had I ever made unilateral decisions about our life? We'd chosen this house together, planned our finances jointly, discussed everything from car purchases to vacation destinations as a team. The accusation felt like revisionist history, reframing our entire marriage through a lens of resentment I hadn't known existed. Name one time, I said quietly. One time I made a major decision without consulting you. She couldn't or wouldn't, instead pivoting to how I was doing it right now by expecting her to uproot her business. The circular logic was maddening. Discussing an opportunity wasn't the same as making a unilateral decision, but Emma had already cast me as the villain in whatever narrative was forming in her head. The argument reached its breaking point near midnight when I suggested we table the discussion until we'd both had time to research options rationally, and Emma responded by hurling her water glass against the kitchen wall, where it shattered into dozens of pieces that scattered across our Italian tile floor. The sound seemed to shock her as much as it shocked me. Emma wasn't violent, had never thrown anything in anger during our entire relationship. She stared at the broken glass with wide eyes, then at her hand like it belonged to someone else. I need space, I said, already mentally calculating which essentials I needed to pack. I'm going to spend the weekend at Kevin's cabin. We can talk when we've both calmed down and can approach this like adults instead of whatever this is turning into. Emma's face crumpled, tears spilling over as she reached for me. Nathan, wait, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I just feel so overwhelmed and attacked. Please don't leave like this. But I was already heading for the bedroom, pulling my weekend duffel from the closet and filling it with clothes and toiletries while Emma followed me, alternating between apologies and renewed accusations about my timing and insensitivity. My cousin Kevin kept a cabin near Grand Lake for weekend getaways, and he'd given me a standing invitation to use it whenever I needed solitude. This seemed like exactly that moment. I drove north through the darkness, my mind replaying the evening's disintegration and wondering how a career opportunity had escalated into the worst fight of our marriage. Emma had texted 4 times before I reached the cabin, messages that oscillated between contrition and defensiveness. I'm sorry about the glass, that was completely out of line, followed by, but you have to understand how trapped this makes me feel, followed by, we need to talk about this like adults, followed by, I can't believe you just left. I responded once, keeping it simple, taking the weekend to clear my head. We'll talk Monday when we can both think straight. The cabin was exactly what I needed, quiet, isolated, furnished with Kevin's fishing gear and a shelf of old paperbacks that would occupy my mind while I processed what had just happened. I spent Saturday splitting firewood and running the property's perimeter trail, physical activity that burned off the anger while my brain worked through the problem like I'd approach any engineering challenge. Identify the variables, eliminate the emotion, find the optimal solution. The optimal solution, I kept concluding, involved Emma and me sitting down with a financial spreadsheet and a map, calculating whether her bakery's current profitability justified turning down a promotion that would increase our household income by $40,000 annually. It involved researching Seattle neighborhoods, visiting the city together, maybe even Emma flying out to scout commercial spaces and meet with business development resources that could accelerate her relaunch. It involved compromise, flexibility, and mutual sacrifice, all things I'd thought we were capable of until that glass shattered against our kitchen wall. Sunday evening, I received a different kind of text from Emma, one that felt almost artificially calm. I've had time to think. You're right that we both need to approach this rationally. Come home tomorrow and we'll figure this out together. I love you. I felt relief flood through me as I read it, the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders finally releasing. This was the Emma I knew, thoughtful, reasonable, willing to work through hard problems even when emotions ran high. I texted back, love you too. I'll be home by 6 tomorrow. We'll make this work. I drove back Monday afternoon feeling cautiously optimistic, already planning how I'd approach the conversation, start by acknowledging her feelings, present the research I'd done over the weekend, propose a timeline that gave her bakery the best chance at a smooth transition or even a temporary long-distance arrangement while she wrapped up existing contracts. I'd apologize for not giving her more advance warning about the promotion timeline, and she'd apologize for the glass and the accusations, and we'd move forward the way we always had, together, as partners who respected each other enough to find solutions rather than ultimatums. I had no idea that Emma's time to think had led her somewhere completely different, to a decision that would detonate our marriage in ways that broken glass could never accomplish, and that the woman waiting for me at home had already crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I walked through our front door at 6:15 Monday evening carrying a bouquet of sunflowers, Emma's favorite, and found her sitting at the dining table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had clearly gone cold hours ago. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept since I'd left, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled into a messy knot that suggested she'd been running her fingers through it compulsively. "Hey," I said, setting down my duffel and the flowers. "I brought a peace offering. I know things got intense Thursday night, but I spent the weekend thinking about solutions and I really believe we can figure this out if we both—" Emma cut me off, her voice strained and urgent. "Nathan, we need to talk right now. Before anything else. Before you say another word about Seattle or solutions or any of it. I need to tell you something and I need you to just listen until I'm finished." The way she said it made my stomach drop, some instinctive recognition that whatever came next would be worse than any argument about relocations or careers. I sat down across from her, the sunflowers still in my hand like a prop in a play I no longer understood. Emma took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on the cold tea rather than my face. "Friday night after you left, I was a complete mess. I was angry and hurt and I felt so abandoned and unheard, like you just walked away from our entire conversation without caring how I felt." Claire texted asking if I wanted to go to this wine tasting event at that new place in Rhino, the one that partners with local wineries, and I thought getting out of the house would help me clear my head. She paused, and I could see her hands trembling against the ceramic mug. I shouldn't have gone. I wasn't in the right headspace and I'd already had 2 glasses of wine here before I even left. Claire introduced me to this sommelier who was running the tasting, and he was charming and attentive and kept asking me questions about the bakery and actually seemed interested in what I was saying. We talked for maybe 2 hours while Claire networked with other people, and he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in months, like someone actually cared about my opinions and my work and my dreams. I felt something cold and sharp forming in my chest, already knowing where this was heading but unable to stop her from saying it. Claire left around 10, and I should have left with her, but I stayed and had another glass of wine with him. His name is David, and we kept talking and laughing and it felt so good to feel appreciated and valued. He asked if I wanted to see the private reserve room where they keep the expensive bottles, and I said yes even though I knew it wasn't actually about the wine. Emma finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "We slept together, Nathan. In the back office at the wine bar. I slept with someone else while you were at Kevin's cabin and I hate myself for it, but I need you to understand why it happened, that it wasn't about him or about wanting someone else. It was about feeling completely invisible and unimportant to you, about needing someone to make me feel like I mattered." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing somewhere in my chest and stomach until I couldn't quite get a full breath. 7 years of marriage, of fidelity and trust and partnership, detonated by a wine-tasting event and a stranger whose name I now knew. I sat there staring at her tear-streaked face, trying to process what she just confessed while she continued talking, words spilling out in a desperate rush. "I'm telling you because I love you and I respect you too much to hide this. I could have just buried it and never said anything, but I don't want lies between us. I want us to work through this together, to understand that this happened because we stopped communicating properly, because you made me feel so worthless and small that I sought validation somewhere else. I know it was wrong, I know, but I need you to see that this is a symptom of bigger problems in our marriage, problems we both created." She reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away instinctively, my body rejecting her touch before my brain had fully caught up to what was happening. Emma's face crumpled further at the rejection. "Please say something. Yell at me, cry, throw something. Just don't sit there looking at me like I'm a stranger. We can get through this, Nathan. People survive affairs all the time. We can go to couples therapy, work on our communication, figure out how to rebuild trust. This doesn't have to end us. I finally found my voice, though it came out flatter and calmer than I expected. Did you use protection? Emma blinked, clearly thrown by the clinical nature of the question. What? It's a simple question. When you slept with David the sommelier in the back office of a wine bar, did you use protection? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second too long. Yes. Of course we did. The hesitation told me everything. She was lying, or at minimum she wasn't certain, which meant she'd been reckless enough to risk my health along with our marriage. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made Emma flinch. You're lying, I said quietly. You hesitated, which means either you didn't use protection or you were too drunk to remember clearly. Either way, you exposed me to God knows what because you were feeling invisible and unimportant after 3 days of me taking space to think about a career decision. Emma was crying harder now, shaking her head. Nathan, please, you're making this about the wrong thing. The protection doesn't matter. The protection absolutely matters, I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. But you're right that it's not the main issue. The main issue is that you're sitting here framing infidelity as something I drove you to, like I'm responsible for your choice to betray our marriage because I had the audacity to receive a job offer and then take a weekend to cool down after you threw a glass at the wall. I watched her process my words, seeing the moment she realized this wasn't going how she'd expected. She'd clearly anticipated that I'd be hurt and angry, that we'd have a dramatic emotional scene, but that ultimately I'd appreciate her honesty and we'd begin the hard work of reconciliation. Instead, she was getting cold analysis and an unwillingness to accept her narrative. I thought you'd understand, she said, her voice small. I thought you'd recognize that this happened because we're in crisis, that it's a wake-up call for both of us about how disconnected we've become. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was seeing Emma clearly for the first time in years, seeing past the version I'd constructed in my head and confronting who she actually was when faced with conflict and consequences. This woman had cheated on me within 72 hours of an argument, had framed her confession as an act of love rather than a desperate attempt to control the narrative, and was now genuinely confused that I wasn't treating her betrayal as a couple's issue we'd solve together. I do understand, I said finally. I understand perfectly. You felt hurt and abandoned, so you retaliated by sleeping with the first man who paid attention to you, and now you're expecting me to share responsibility for your decision because that's easier than accepting that you destroyed our marriage entirely on your own. Emma stared at me like I'd slapped her, her mouth opening and closing without sound for several seconds before she found words. What are you saying? I picked up my duffel bag from where I'd dropped it by the door, the sunflowers still clutched in my other hand like evidence of how naive I'd been just 10 minutes earlier. I'm saying I want a divorce. The words seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Emma stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, clattering against the floor. No, Nathan, you can't just, we haven't even talked about this. You can't make a decision like that based on one conversation. You made a decision that ended our marriage when you slept with someone else, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I'm just acknowledging the reality you created. This marriage is over. What followed was 4 hours of the most exhausting emotional warfare I'd ever experienced. Emma cycled through every possible reaction: denial, bargaining, rage, manipulation, like she was working through a checklist of tactics to find the one that would crack my resolve. She started with denial, insisting I was being irrational and reactionary, that people don't end 7-year marriages over one mistake during a crisis moment. She promised we could work through this with therapy, that affairs didn't have to be relationship death sentences, that stronger couples had survived worse and emerged more connected. When that didn't move me, she shifted to bargaining. She'd sell the bakery, she said, tears streaming down her face. She'd move to Seattle without complaint, give up Pearl and provisions and everything she'd built if that's what it took to prove her commitment to our marriage. She'd do individual therapy, couples therapy, whatever I needed to feel secure again. She'd give me full access to her phone, her email, her location, complete transparency until I could trust her again. I listened to each offer with a growing sense of detachment, recognizing them for what they were: desperate attempts to avoid consequences rather than genuine remorse. "It's not about punishment," I told her as she cycled into her third round of promises. "It's about compatibility. What I learned tonight is that when you face serious conflict, your instinct is to retaliate destructively instead of working toward solutions. That's not something therapy can fix because it's fundamental to who you are." Emma's face twisted with anger, the tears stopping abruptly like I'd flipped a switch. "You're such a cold, unforgiving bastard. You know that? You're going to throw away 7 years, everything we built together, over one night? One mistake I made when I was emotionally devastated." "You weren't devastated," I said quietly. "You were angry that I didn't immediately capitulate to your demand to stay in Denver. There's a difference." That's when she really lost it, screaming that I'd always been emotionally unavailable, that I treated our marriage like a business arrangement with terms and conditions, that she'd felt lonely and unappreciated for years while I prioritized work over our relationship. The accusations came rapid fire, each one designed to make me doubt myself, to accept partial blame for her choices. "If I'm so terrible," I finally said when she paused for breath, "then you should be relieved I'm leaving. You'll be free to find someone who actually appreciates you." By midnight, Emma had exhausted herself into a different kind of desperation, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, makeup smeared and voice hoarse. "Where are you going?" she asked as I headed toward the bedroom to pack more thoroughly. "Back to Kevin's cabin for now. I'll find an apartment this week." "Nathan, please." Her voice cracked. "Please don't do this. I know I fucked up, but we can fix this. We've been together since we were 24. You're my whole adult life. I don't know who I am without you." The vulnerability in her voice almost got to me, almost. But then I remembered her sitting at this table explaining how my job offer had driven her into another man's bed, how she'd framed her betrayal as something I needed to understand and forgive, and the sympathy evaporated. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're resourceful." I spent an hour packing clothes, toiletries, important documents, and my laptop while Emma followed me from room to room, alternating between pleading and attacking. When I couldn't take another word, I called Kevin from the bedroom. "Hey, I need to stay at the cabin for a while longer. Couple weeks, maybe a month. Things with Emma we're getting divorced." Kevin, bless him, didn't ask questions. "Stay as long as you need, man. I'll drop off extra groceries tomorrow." The next morning, I contacted Rebecca Hoffman, a divorce attorney my colleague had used during his separation. Rebecca was 50-ish, pragmatic, and apparently immune to emotional manipulation, exactly what I needed. "Walk me through what happened," she said during our phone consultation Tuesday morning. I gave her the abbreviated version: 7-year marriage, career opportunity causing conflict, wife retaliated by having an affair during a 3-day cooling-off period, wife then confessed and expected reconciliation. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "And you're certain you want to proceed with divorce? No interest in counseling or trial separation?" "I'm certain. When someone shows you who they are under stress, believe them. Emma showed me she solves problems by creating worse problems." "Then let's get started," Rebecca said. "Colorado is no fault, so her affair is legally irrelevant, but it'll matter for negotiating terms. Do you own property together?" We spent 40 minutes discussing assets: the house we'd bought 3 years ago, Emma's bakery that I'd helped capitalize, retirement accounts, vehicles. Rebecca warned me that Emma would likely fight for the bakery despite my initial investment, and that Colorado's equitable distribution laws meant I'd probably lose money on the house even though I'd contributed more to the down payment. "Divorce is expensive," Rebecca said bluntly. "Even amicable ones. Contested ones can get financially devastating. If she wants to fight, this could drag out for months and cost you $30,000 or more in legal fees." "I don't care what it costs," I said. "I just want out." 2 days later, Emma's parents showed up at Kevin's cabin. I was splitting firewood when I heard a car engine, looking up to see her father's silver Lexus pulling into the gravel driveway. James and Patricia fucking Thornton, who'd always treated me like a son until approximately 72 hours ago. James got out first, his face red with anger, dressed in his standard golf outfit like he'd interrupted his morning 9 holes for this intervention. Patricia emerged from the passenger side looking teary and dramatic, clutching a tissue. "Nathan," James said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when closing real estate deals. "We need to talk. Now." I set down the axe, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Hello, James." Patricia. "Wasn't expecting company." "Emma told us what's happening," Patricia said, her voice trembling. "How you're divorcing her over one mistake." "Nathan, honey, this is insane. You two are perfect together. Every couple goes through rough patches." James cut her off, stepping closer in a way that was clearly meant to be physically intimidating. He had 3 inches and 40 pounds on me, and he'd been a college linebacker decades ago. "You're throwing away my daughter like she's disposable. After everything our family has done for you, the connections I made to help your career, the Christmas presents, the vacations we included you on. This is how you repay us." I met his eyes without flinching. "Emma cheated on me because I received a job offer. That's not a rough patch. That's a fundamental character problem. She made one mistake." Patricia cried. "One night when she was emotional and vulnerable. She came to you with complete honesty, and you're punishing her for being brave enough to confess. Do you know how rare that is? How many people would have just hidden it?" "I'm not punishing her," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm choosing not to stay married to someone whose conflict resolution strategy is retaliation. That's my right." James moved even closer, now standing just a foot away, using his size to try to intimidate me into compliance. "You're being a selfish, unforgiving bastard. Emma is devastated. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She loves you and you're destroying her over your goddamn pride." I looked at this man who'd welcomed me into his family 7 years ago, who'd taught me to golf and shared bourbon on his back deck during Sunday dinners, and realized he was exactly like Emma, convinced that consequences were optional if you just demanded loudly enough that they be waived. "James, you need to step back. Right now." Something in my voice made him hesitate, some recognition that I was done being accommodating. He took one step backward but kept talking. "Our family doesn't divorce. Do you understand? Patricia and I have been married 34 years. We've worked through problems that would have ended weaker marriages. Emma comes from a family that doesn't quit when things get hard." "Then Emma should have remembered that before she quit our marriage," I said. "Now I need you both to leave. This is private property and you're not welcome here." Patricia made a wounded sound. "Nathan, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about your reputation in the community. People respect you and Emma as a couple. If you divorce her over this, everyone will know why. It'll damage both your careers, your social standing, and there it was, the real concern. Not Emma's well-being or our marriage, but how a divorce would reflect on the Thornton family's carefully cultivated image." "Let them know," I said. "I'm not interested in protecting Emma's reputation when she didn't think about protecting our marriage." James's face went even redder. "You fucking..." He stepped forward aggressively again, and this time I didn't back down. I was done being intimidated. "Touch me and I call the police. You have 10 seconds to get in your car and leave." We stood there in a tense standoff, James clearly calculating whether he could physically force me to reconsider, me already reaching for my phone. Patricia grabbed her husband's arm. "James, come on. This isn't helping. He's being unreasonable, but we can't force him." They left, but not before James delivered one final threat. "You're making a huge mistake, Nathan. And when Emma's attorney is done with you, you'll regret every bit of this. We'll make sure you pay for what you're doing to our daughter." The character assassination campaign started exactly 6 days after I filed for divorce, though I didn't realize what was happening until I was already bleeding reputation from a dozen different wounds Emma had inflicted while I was focused on legal paperwork and finding an apartment. I'd naively assumed our split would remain private, that we'd handle it like adults and spare our social circle the messy details, but Emma had apparently decided that controlling the narrative was more important than dignity. The first hint came when my friend Marcus approached me at the gym on a Wednesday evening, his expression uncomfortable as he spotted me on the bench press. "Hey man, need to ask you something," he said after I'd racked the bar. What's this I'm hearing about you divorcing Emma because she wanted to stay in Denver? That seems harsh. I sat up, toweling sweat from my face. That's not what happened. Who told you that? Marcus shifted his weight. Emma posted something in the neighborhood group about supporting women through career struggles, and Sarah mentioned at book club that Emma's going through a divorce because she wouldn't relocate for your job. Made it sound like you issued an ultimatum. The neighborhood group. Our social circle. Emma was already rewriting history, casting herself as the woman who'd stood up for her business independence and was being punished for it. I gave Marcus the actual story, the affair, the confession, Emma's expectation that I'd just work through her infidelity, and watched his expression shift from skeptical to shocked. Jesus. She cheated and then expected you to stay. She framed it as an emotional reaction to feeling abandoned, I said. Like it was a symptom of our communication problems rather than a choice she made. Marcus shook his head. That's fucked up, man. But you should know Emma's version is spreading. People are taking sides without knowing what actually happened. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I discovered that Emma had been systematically telling friends, neighbors, and her bakery customers a carefully sanitized version of events. We'd had a fight about my career demanding we relocate. She'd expressed doubts about leaving her business. I'd become angry and controlling, and now I was divorcing her for refusing to sacrifice her dreams for mine. No mention of David the sommelier or the wine bar's back office. Several people from our extended social circle confronted me with variations of Emma's story. My neighbor Doug mentioned that his wife was disappointed in me for being so inflexible about Emma's career. A couple we'd had dinner with monthly sent a text saying they supported Emma's brave decision to prioritize her own goals. One of Emma's bakery customers apparently told everyone at her yoga class that Emma was divorcing her controlling husband who couldn't handle successful women. The most damaging version came from Claire, Emma's business partner and supposed best friend, who'd been with her at the wine tasting event and knew exactly what had happened. Claire started telling people that I'd been emotionally unavailable throughout the marriage, that Emma had felt neglected and unappreciated for years, and that my reaction to one mistake proved I'd never truly loved Emma. She carefully avoided mentioning the affair to most people, instead painting me as someone who'd been looking for an excuse to leave and seized on Emma's moment of weakness as justification. I was at a client meeting when my boss, Phil, called me into his office with an expression I couldn't read. "Nathan, I need to ask you about something sensitive," he said, closing the door. I received a call from Harold Chen's office this morning. Harold Chen was the head of Denver's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, a crucial client whose light rail projects represented about 30% of our firm's annual revenue. My stomach dropped. "What about?" Phil leaned against his desk. Apparently Harold's wife is friends with someone named Claire who runs a bakery, and there are rumors circulating that you're going through a difficult divorce involving allegations of emotional abuse. Harold wanted to know if we're aware of any behavioral issues that might affect your work on the transit project. The room felt like it was tilting. Emma's friend was spreading rumors that had now reached my professional sphere, potentially jeopardizing not just my reputation but my career. "Phil, that's completely false. My wife cheated on me during a disagreement about relocating for the Seattle promotion. I filed for divorce. There's no abuse, no behavioral issues, just her friends rewriting history to make her look better." Phil studied my face for a long moment. "I believe you. You've been with us for 6 years and you've never shown anything but professionalism. But Nathan, perception matters in our industry. If clients are hearing rumors that make them uncomfortable, it affects our relationships regardless of truth." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to control this narrative before it controls you. Talk to your attorney about cease and desist letters if these women are spreading defamatory statements. And consider that Seattle transfer we discussed. Getting out of Denver might be the smartest career move right now." The realization that Emma and her allies were actively sabotaging my professional reputation sent me straight to Rebecca's office that afternoon. I explained the situation, the false narrative, the rumors reaching clients, Claire's whisper campaign, and watched Rebecca's expression harden. "This is defamation if they're making false statements of fact," she said, making notes. Emotional abuse allegations are particularly serious. We can send cease and desist letters to Claire and anyone else spreading demonstrably false information. Will that stop them? Rebecca gave me a frank look. Sometimes. But often it just makes them more careful about what they say publicly while continuing the campaign privately. Your bigger problem is that you've been staying quiet while Emma controls the story. People believe the first version they hear. So what do? You start telling people the truth. Not aggressively, not defensively, just factually. When someone brings up the divorce, you calmly explain that Emma had an affair during a disagreement about your career, confessed, and you chose to end the marriage. Don't embellish, don't attack her character beyond stating facts, but stop protecting her reputation at the expense of your own. I started following Rebecca's advice, and the reactions were revealing. People who'd been cold and judgmental suddenly became supportive once they knew the full story. Marcus spread the word through our gym crowd. My colleague David told his wife, who told her book club, and suddenly the narrative was competing in ways that clearly frustrated Emma. I know the counter-narrative was getting back to her because the tactics escalated. Emma's younger sister Melissa, who'd always seemed relatively reasonable, posted a long Instagram story about supporting women through divorce that included photos of Emma looking devastated and thin, with captions about surviving emotional abuse and financial control. The post never mentioned my name, but tagged our neighborhood, my employer's city, and enough mutual friends that anyone in our circle would know exactly who she was talking about. The post got over 300 likes and dozens of comments calling me every variation of controlling bastard. I screenshot the post and sent it to Rebecca, who added it to our documentation. "This is borderline defamation," she said. "The financial control allegation is particularly problematic if she's implying you controlled her access to money. I never controlled anything. We had joint accounts. She had her own business income and credit cards." Then we include this in our response to her divorce filing. Every false statement they make publicly becomes evidence of bad faith in negotiations. The battle wasn't just happening on social media and in social circles. Emma had apparently decided that since the truth wasn't working in her favor, she'd manufacture a more sympathetic version. She filed a response to my divorce petition that included claims I'd been financially coercive, that I'd isolated her from friends and family, and that she was seeking therapy for the emotional trauma of our marriage. Her attorney requested that I pay for her therapy costs, her temporary housing, and provide spousal support during proceedings because my patterns of control had left her unable to function normally. Rebecca's response was swift and brutal. We provided bank statements showing Emma had unrestricted access to all funds, phone records showing regular contact with friends and family, and affidavits from my colleagues about Emma's presence at numerous social events. We included screenshots of Emma's own Instagram posts from throughout our marriage, showing a woman who'd traveled, socialized, and run a business with no signs of isolation or control. And we filed a countermotion arguing that Emma's false allegations constituted bad faith and requesting she be responsible for her own legal fees as a consequence. The judge assigned to our case was a woman in her 60s named Susan Crawford, who'd apparently seen every divorce tactic in the book and had no patience for manufactured drama. At our first hearing, she read through both filings with an expression of increasing irritation. "Ms. Thornton," Judge Crawford said, looking at Emma over her reading glasses, "your filing alleges financial control, but the evidence shows joint accounts with equal access. It alleges isolation but shows regular social activity. It alleges emotional abuse, but provides no documentation, no medical records, no witness statements beyond your own claims. Would you like to explain the discrepancy?" Emma's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Robert something, stood up. "Your Honor, financial abuse often leaves no paper trail. My client's experience of control and isolation was psychological rather than counsel," Judge Crawford interrupted. "I've been doing this for 23 years. I know the difference between genuine abuse and a strategic filing. Unless you have actual evidence beyond your client's convenient recollections, I suggest we focus on the legitimate issues, asset division and dissolution timeline." I watched Emma's face as the judge essentially called her a liar in legal terms. She looked shocked, Like she genuinely believed her attorney could sell the abuse narrative and expected the court to simply accept her victimhood without evidence. Robert tried again. "Your Honor, my client is willing to provide testimony about the emotional patterns," noted. "But testimony without corroboration isn't evidence, it's a story. Let's discuss the bakery." The bakery became the central battleground. Emma's attorney argued that Pearl and Provisions was solely her creation, that she'd built it from the ground up, and that my initial investment had been a gift rather than a loan or partnership stake. They provided documentation showing Emma as sole owner and operator, with no formal agreement outlining my financial interest. Rebecca countered with bank transfers showing my $30,000 initial investment, emails where Emma and I had discussed the business as our retirement cushion, and my extensive involvement in business accounting and tax preparation. Mr. Hayes essentially functioned as an unpaid CFO for 3 years, Rebecca argued. His financial contribution and ongoing labor created a stake in this business regardless of whose name is on the LLC paperwork. Judge Crawford looked at Emma. "Did your husband invest $30,000 in your business?" "Yes, but it was a gift to support my dreams. Was there any written agreement stating it was a gift?" Emma hesitated. "No, but we were married. Spouses support each other." "And do you have any documentation showing you repaid this amount?" "I was building the business. All profits went back into operations." Judge Crawford made a note. "Then, absent evidence that this was a gift, it appears to be a marital asset subject to division. We'll order a business valuation to determine current worth and appropriate distribution." The business valuation became Emma's next battleground, and watching her sabotage her own bakery to spite me would have been fascinating if it wasn't costing us both money and dragging out the divorce another 6 weeks. The court appointed an independent assessor named Gerald Phillips, who spent 2 weeks reviewing Pearl and Provisions' financial records, visiting the location, and interviewing Emma about operations and revenue projections. When his preliminary report arrived at Rebecca's office, the numbers didn't make sense. According to Gerald's analysis, the bakery that had been generating roughly $8,000 monthly profit for the past year was suddenly operating at a loss. Revenue had dropped 40% in just 2 months, with Emma claiming that the stress of divorce had made it impossible to maintain her previous output and customer relationships. She'd reduced her operating hours, stopped taking new wholesale orders, and let her social media presence, previously her main marketing tool, go completely dormant. "She's tanking it deliberately," I told Rebecca, staring at the financial statements. "Look at these numbers. She went from 15 wholesale accounts to 6 in 8 weeks. That doesn't happen organically." Rebecca studied the report. "Can you prove it's deliberate rather than actual distress?" Her Instagram used to have daily posts about new products and behind-the-scenes content. She hasn't posted in 7 weeks. She's not answering customer inquiries. I know because Marcus's wife tried to place an order and got radio silence. She's letting the business fail to lower its valuation so I get less in the divorce. Unfortunately, proving intent versus genuine struggle is difficult, Rebecca said. Unless you have evidence she's explicitly stated she's sabotaging the business. I didn't have that evidence, but the pattern was obvious to anyone willing to look. Emma had spent 3 years building Pearl and Provisions into a thriving business, and now she was letting it collapse rather than let me receive any portion of its worth. The irony was that she was hurting herself more than me. Even at the depressed valuation, we'd both walk away with less than if she'd maintained normal operations. But spite doesn't follow logic. While the bakery valuation dragged on, Emma's parents decided to escalate their involvement in ways that crossed from annoying into genuinely intrusive. They hired a private investigator named Dennis something or other, whose job was apparently to follow me around Denver looking for evidence of infidelity, substance abuse, or anything else they could use to flip the narrative back in Emma's favor. I noticed him first at the grocery store near my new apartment. A guy in his 50s wearing a baseball cap and pretending to shop while clearly watching me select vegetables. Then I saw the same guy at the coffee shop near my office, sitting 3 tables away with a newspaper he wasn't reading. When I spotted him parked outside my gym, I walked directly to his car and knocked on the window. He looked startled but lowered it. "Nathan Hayes?" he asked, like he hadn't been following me for 3 days. Yeah. And you are? Dennis Porter. I'm working for the Thornton family. Just doing my job. Your job is following me around hoping to catch me doing what, exactly? Buying the wrong kind of coffee? Dennis had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. They want documentation of your activities. Standard divorce investigation. Tell them they're wasting their money. I go to work, I go to the gym, I go home. Sometimes I grab dinner with friends. There's nothing to document except that I'm boring. He shrugged. Like I said, just doing my job. Dennis followed me for another week before apparently reporting back that I was, in fact, exactly as boring as advertised. My routine consisted of work, exercise, meal prep, and occasionally meeting Marcus or other friends for dinner or drinks. No secret girlfriend, no suspicious activities, just a man going through a divorce and maintaining his normal life with perhaps more gym time than strictly necessary. The lack of scandal seemed to frustrate Emma's camp, because they pivoted to a different strategy, demanding I cover Emma's therapy expenses and temporary living costs. Her attorney filed a motion arguing that my abrupt decision to divorce had created a mental health crisis requiring intensive therapy and that I should be financially responsible for helping Emma recover from the trauma of our failed marriage. The requested amount was stunning: $300 per week for therapy sessions, $1,500 monthly for her rent at a new apartment she'd moved into after leaving our house, plus another $800 monthly for what her attorney called wellness expenses, including yoga classes, meditation retreats, and a nutritionist to help her recover the weight she'd lost from stress. They want you to pay for her yoga? Rebecca said, reading the motion with visible disbelief. And meditation retreats. Apparently those are medical necessities now. This is absurd. We're filing an opposition immediately. Rebecca's response pointed out that Emma had her own income from the bakery, however diminished, and that voluntary therapy for distress caused by her own infidelity wasn't my financial responsibility. We also included evidence that Emma's social calendar had been remarkably active for someone claiming debilitating trauma. Her Instagram stories showed her at restaurants, bars, and social events multiple times per week, looking perfectly functional and surrounded by supportive friends. The real breakthrough came when Marcus's wife Jennifer, who'd been doing some casual investigating of her own, sent me screenshots of Emma's activity on a dating app. Apparently Emma had created a profile 2 weeks after I'd filed for divorce, listing herself as recently separated and looking for genuine connection with emotionally available men. The profile included several photos of her looking beautiful and carefree, with a bio that mentioned her successful bakery business and love of wine tasting. She's on Bumble while claiming she's too traumatized to function, I told Rebecca, forwarding Jennifer's screenshots. And she's using photos from our anniversary trip last year. Rebecca actually laughed. This is perfect. We'll include this in our opposition to her support request. Hard to argue you're experiencing debilitating mental health crisis while actively dating. The opposition hearing was satisfying in ways I probably shouldn't admit. Emma showed up looking appropriately distressed, minimal makeup, clothes that hung loose on her frame, the visual presentation of someone barely holding it together. Then her attorney introduced her therapy records showing twice-weekly sessions focused on recovering from emotional abuse and processing abandonment trauma. Rebecca let them finish their presentation, then calmly introduced the Bumble profile screenshots. Your Honor, while Ms. Thornton claims to be experiencing such severe distress that she requires my client to fund extensive therapy and wellness programs, she's simultaneously maintaining an active social life and dating profile. These photos are from the couple's anniversary trip, and this bio describes her as seeking genuine connection, hardly the behavior of someone too traumatized to function. Judge Crawford looked at Emma. Ms. Thornton, can you explain the discrepancy between your claimed mental state and your apparent ability to socialize and seek new relationships? Emma's face flushed. I was trying to move on. My therapist encouraged me to stay socially engaged. That's healthy, Judge Crawford agreed. But it undermines your argument that you're so impaired by this divorce that your ex-husband should fund your recovery. Motion for therapy expenses and wellness costs is denied. You may continue therapy at your own expense. Emma's attorney tried to salvage something. What about temporary living expenses, Your Honor? Ms. Thornton did have to vacate the marital home because she chose to, Judge Crawford interrupted. The home is marital property. She could have stayed there during proceedings. If she chose to lease a separate apartment, that's her financial responsibility. We'd won that round, but Emma's camp wasn't finished. Her parents apparently decided that if they couldn't prove I was a villain, they'd make me pay in other ways. James started contacting my professional contacts, ostensibly asking about opportunities for Emma, but really spreading subtle hints about my character. My colleague David got a call from James asking if our firm had any marketing positions, and during the conversation, James mentioned that Emma was recovering from a difficult marriage to someone who prioritized career over family. One of my clients received a similar call. The harassment was subtle enough to be deniable but clear enough to be damaging. I documented every instance and filed a motion requesting a restraining order preventing Emma's family from contacting my professional network. Judge Crawford granted it, warning that further interference could result in contempt charges. The bakery valuation finally came back showing Pearl and Provisions worth approximately $78,000 despite Emma's efforts to tank it. Gerald had assessed its value based on historical performance rather than current struggles, reasoning that the recent decline was temporary and divorce-related. Judge Crawford ordered the business sold with proceeds split 50-50, giving Emma first option to buy out my half at market value within 60 days. Emma's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She filed an emergency motion claiming the sale order would destroy her livelihood and identity, that Pearl and Provisions was her life's work, and that forcing its sale constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Her attorney argued passionately about the injustice of making Emma surrender the business she'd built with her own hands. Judge Crawford's response was ice cold. Ms. Thornton, your husband provided the initial capital and ongoing financial management for this business. The court has determined it's a marital asset. You have the option to buy out his interest at fair market value. If you choose not to exercise that option, the business will be sold and proceeds divided. This isn't punishment, it's equitable distribution under Colorado law. Emma couldn't afford to buy me out. Her parents refused to loan her the money after already spending tens of thousands on attorney fees and the useless private investigator. The business went on the market, and I watched from a distance as Emma's dreams slowly circled the drain, knowing she'd accelerated its demise through her own sabotage and spite. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Emma ambushed me in my engineering firm's parking garage on a Tuesday evening, and for the first time since that confession at our dining table, I saw something in her face that looked like genuine remorse rather than strategic emotion. I was loading my laptop bag into my car when I heard footsteps echoing in the concrete structure, turning to find Emma standing about 10 feet away looking like a completely different person from the woman I'd married. She'd lost weight, too much weight, and her clothes hung on her frame in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about appearance altogether. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a careless ponytail that would have been unthinkable for the Emma who'd spent an hour on makeup before leaving the house. "Nathan, please don't leave," she said, her voice hoarse like she'd been crying recently. "I just need 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes to talk without lawyers and judges and all the bullshit." I should have gotten in my car and driven away, but something about her defeated posture made me hesitate. "Emma, you can't ambush me at work. If you want to talk, go through Rebecca." Tried. "Your attorney won't let me contact you directly, and every conversation gets filtered through legal language until nothing means anything anymore." She took a tentative step closer. "I'm not here to fight or manipulate. I just need you to hear something before the divorce finalizes and we never speak again." Against my better judgment, I leaned against my car. 10 minutes. That's it. Emma wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold despite the mild evening temperature. "I've been in therapy twice a week since this started. Real therapy, not the bullshit I was claiming to need your money for. Dr. Sanders, my therapist, she's been helping me understand patterns I've had my entire life, patterns I didn't even recognize until everything fell apart." She took a shaky breath. "I weaponized the affair. I know that sounds clinical and detached, but that's what I did. You made me feel powerless about the Seattle decision, like my business and my dreams were secondary to your career, and I couldn't articulate that anger in a healthy way. So I hurt you in the worst way I could think of, and then I convinced myself it was justified because of how you'd made me feel. I said nothing, just watched her struggle through what was clearly a prepared speech that kept getting derailed by emotion. Dr. Sanders helped me see that I've done this before, not cheating specifically, but explosive retaliation whenever I feel cornered or powerless. In college, when my roommate confronted me about not paying rent on time, I stole her boyfriend instead of just being honest about my financial problems. When my first boss criticized my work, I reported him to HR for harassment that didn't actually happen. I blow things up instead of fixing them because destruction feels more powerful than vulnerability. She wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. My parents always protected me from consequences. Every time I fucked up, they'd smooth it over, pay off whoever I'd wronged, spin the narrative so I was the victim, make the problem disappear. I never learned that actions have permanent consequences because nothing was ever actually permanent for me. Until you. I leaned back against the car, processing what she was saying. It aligned with everything I'd observed. Her parents showing up at Kevin's cabin expecting to intimidate me into compliance, James trying to interfere with my professional contacts, the way Emma had genuinely seemed shocked when I didn't treat her confession as a couple's issue we'd work through together. I expected you to be like everyone else in my life, Emma continued. I expected you to be angry and hurt, but then eventually forgive me because that's what people do for me. They absorb my damage and let me move on without really changing. You were the first person who looked at what I did and said, "No, this is who you are, and I don't want to build a life with someone like that." A couple of tears tracked down her cheeks. And you were right. You were completely right, Nathan. When things got hard between us, my instinct wasn't to communicate or compromise, it was to detonate everything and then expect you to help me clean up the wreckage. That's not partnership. That's hostage-taking. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but saw only exhaustion and what appeared to be hard-won self-awareness. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know that you weren't crazy or cruel for leaving. You were right to see that I was fundamentally unsafe to be in a relationship with. She laughed bitterly. Dr. Sanders says I have to stop externalizing consequences, stop blaming my behavior on how other people make me feel. I slept with David because I chose to, not because you drove me to it. I tanked my bakery because I was more interested in spiting you than protecting my own interests. I let my parents turn this divorce into warfare because taking accountability felt worse than playing victim. Emma moved closer until she was just a few feet away, close enough that I could see how tired she really was. I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back. I know that's not possible. I destroyed what we had, and I did it deliberately even if I couldn't admit that to myself at the time. I just wanted you to know that you did the right thing. You saw me clearly when I was still lying to myself, and you had the strength to walk away from something broken instead of trying to fix it. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad, sad for the years we'd wasted, sad for the woman she might have been if she'd learned accountability earlier, sad that it took losing everything for her to start being honest with herself. What happens now? I finally asked. With you, I mean. Emma shrugged. Pearl and Provisions sold last week. Some young couple bought it for $65,000. I couldn't watch someone else run my business, so I didn't even go to the closing. My half of the proceeds plus the house settlement will give me maybe $40,000 after legal fees. I'm moving to Portland next month to work for a corporate catering company, just a regular employee making $42,000 a year planning events for tech companies. The trajectory from bakery owner to corporate caterer clearly pained her, but she said it without the self-pity I'd expected. My sister lives there, and she's the only person in my family who told me I fucked up instead of making excuses for me. I need to be around people who won't let me get away with my bullshit. I nodded slowly. That sounds like a good plan. Will you ever forgive me? The question was quiet, almost childlike. I considered it honestly. I already have, in the sense that I'm not angry anymore. But forgiveness isn't really the issue, Emma. The issue was always compatibility. You retaliate when you feel powerless, and I need a partner who problem solves instead. That fundamental difference doesn't change just because you've gained insight into why you do it. I know. She smiled sadly. Dr. Sanders says insight isn't the same as change, and change takes years of consistent work. I'm not there yet. Maybe I won't ever be. But at least I can stop lying to myself about who I am right now. We stood in silence for a moment, and I realized this was probably the last real conversation we'd ever have. Once the divorce finalized in 2 weeks, we'd have no reason to ever speak again. No shared property, no children connecting us, just 7 years of history that would fade into irrelevance as we built separate lives. I wrote you a letter, Emma said suddenly, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. I was going to mail it, but since you're here, it's everything I wish I'd said 3 months ago instead of making excuses and blaming you for my choices. You don't have to read it now or ever, but I wanted you to have it. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of several pages inside. Okay. Thank you for listening, Emma said, already backing toward her car. And Nathan? I really am sorry. Not just for cheating or for the divorce being ugly, but for wasting years of your life with someone who wasn't capable of being the partner you deserved. You're a good man, and you're going to make someone very happy someday. Someone who actually knows how to appreciate you. She was in her car and driving away before I could formulate a response, leaving me standing in the parking garage holding an envelope I wasn't sure I wanted to open. I didn't read the letter that night or the next day. It sat on my kitchen counter for a week, this last communication from the woman who'd been the center of my life for 7 years. When I finally opened it one evening after a particularly long day at work, I found 3 pages of handwritten apology that was more honest and self-aware than anything Emma had said during our entire marriage. She admitted she'd sabotaged us because she was terrified of the Seattle move exposing that her success in Denver was partially luck and circumstance rather than pure skill. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to replicate her bakery's success in a new market, that she'd fail and I'd see her as the fraud she suspected she was deep down. The affair wasn't about attraction to David, it was about blowing up the marriage before the move could reveal her inadequacies. She apologized for letting her parents turn the divorce into warfare, for the false abuse allegations, for tanking her business to spite me even though it hurt her more. She acknowledged that every destructive choice had been hers alone, not driven by my behavior but by her inability to handle vulnerability and fear in healthy ways. The letter ended with a line that stuck with me. You didn't just lose me, I lost the version of myself that could have grown into someone worthy of you. That loss is entirely my fault, and I'll carry it forever. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, feeling nothing in particular. Not satisfaction, not renewed anger, not even much sadness. Just a distant acknowledgement that Emma was finally being honest, even if that honesty came too late to matter. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 4 months after Emma's confession had detonated our marriage, and the whole proceeding took less than 20 minutes in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and institutional cleaning products. Emma sat on the opposite side of the room with her attorney, and I noticed immediately that her parents weren't there, just her father, who approached me in the hallway before we entered the courtroom. Nathan, James said, his voice lacking the aggressive edge it had carried at Kevin's cabin. I owe you an apology. For showing up at your cousin's place, for trying to intimidate you, for interfering with your work contacts. I was protecting my daughter, but I was doing it in ways that made everything worse. I studied his face, seeing genuine regret there. Okay. Emma's therapist helped us understand that Patricia and I have been enabling her destructive patterns for years, he continued. Every time she created a problem, we'd smooth it over instead of letting her face consequences. We turned her into someone who thought accountability was optional. He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. We refused to help her buy out your share of the bakery because Dr. Sanders told us that was exactly the kind of rescue that prevented Emma from growing up. It killed Patricia to watch Emma lose that business, but it was the right thing to do. I appreciate you saying that, I said and meant it. Emma's moving to Portland next week, James added. Starting over with her sister. We're supporting that decision, but we're not funding it. She needs to build something on her own without our money smoothing the path. We shook hands, and I watched him walk back to sit with Emma, feeling a strange closure I hadn't expected. The hearing itself was procedural and emotionless. Judge Crawford reviewed the settlement terms we'd agreed to. House sold with proceeds split 60-40 in my favor since I'd contributed more to the down payment. Retirement accounts divided, Emma keeping her car and me keeping mine, and the bakery proceeds already distributed. No spousal support, no ongoing financial entanglement, just a clean severance of two lives that had been intertwined for 7 years. Mr. Hayes, Miss Thornton, do you both understand and agree to these terms? Judge Crawford asked. We both said yes. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I hereby grant the dissolution of your marriage. You're both free to leave and rebuild your lives separately. Good luck to you both. And just like that, it was over. I walked out of the courthouse into crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss Phil. Seattle office confirmed your start date for January 15th. Congratulations on the promotion and the fresh start. I'd accepted the Seattle position 6 weeks earlier, once it became clear the divorce would finalize before the end of the year. The promotion came with a 35% raise, a relocation package, and most importantly, distance from Denver and all the complicated history it now contained. I sold our house, the Craftsman bungalow Emma and I had renovated together, for $40,000 more than we'd paid for it, taking my portion and buying a modern townhouse near Seattle's waterfront before I'd even moved to the city. The place was everything our Denver house wasn't. New construction, minimal maintenance, no memories embedded in the walls. I spent the next 2 months wrapping up projects at work, saying goodbye to friends, and systematically dismantling the life I'd built in Denver. Marcus and Jennifer threw me a going-away party where multiple people mentioned they'd seen Emma's social media posts about her Portland move, always phrased as an exciting new chapter, rather than an admission of defeat. I didn't look at her profiles, didn't need to. Emma was moving on, I was moving on, and our paths would never cross again. I moved to Seattle on January 7th, spending a week getting settled before starting my new position. The city was everything I'd hoped, dynamic, growing, full of ambitious infrastructure projects that would define my career for the next decade. My townhouse had views of Elliott Bay, a home office with enough space for proper drafting equipment, and neighbors who had no idea I'd recently been divorced or had any history worth knowing. The engineering firm's Seattle office was larger and more prestigious than the Denver branch, with senior project managers who'd worked on iconic structures I'd studied in school. My first day felt less like starting a new job and more like stepping into the career I'd always been working toward, the one Emma had almost derailed with her ultimatum about staying in Denver. 6 months after the divorce finalized, I was having coffee with my colleague Rachel when she mentioned seeing a mutual connections social media post about Emma. Don't know if you want to hear this, Rachel said carefully, but apparently your ex is thriving in Portland. New relationship, new job, whole fresh start situation. I felt nothing at the information. Good for her. I hope it works out. Rachel studied my face. You really don't care, do you? Not even a little bit, I said honestly. That part of my life is completely closed. And it was true. I'd spent months processing the betrayal, the divorce, the character assassination campaign, and somewhere along the way I'd stopped feeling anything about Emma beyond distant hope that she'd figure herself out. She wasn't my problem anymore, wasn't my responsibility, wasn't even really a person in my present tense, just someone I used to know who'd taught me valuable lessons about boundaries and self-respect. I met Lisa Chen in late July at a professional conference on sustainable urban design, and something about her immediately felt different from every relationship I'd had before. She was a structural engineer at a firm that frequently partnered with mine, 32, Whipsmart, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard during a particularly boring panel discussion. If this presenter says, "Synergistic solutions" one more time, I'm walking out, she whispered to me, and I had to bite back a laugh. We got coffee after the panel, then dinner that night, and by the end of the conference had exchanged numbers with genuine intention to stay in contact. Lisa and I took things slowly, both having been burned by previous relationships. She'd ended a 5-year relationship 2 years earlier when her ex refused to commit to marriage. We spent August and September seeing each other casually, having long conversations about career goals, family dynamics, what we actually wanted from life beyond the standard relationship script. I need someone who can handle conflict like an adult, I told her during dinner at a seafood place overlooking Puget Sound. My ex used to blow things up when she felt cornered instead of working through problems. Lisa nodded. My ex would just shut down completely. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't engage, just passive-aggressive silence for days. I need someone who can actually communicate when things get hard. What does healthy conflict resolution even look like? I asked, genuinely curious. I think it looks like being able to disagree without questioning the entire relationship, Lisa said thoughtfully. Like you can have a serious argument about something important and still trust that you're on the same team working toward a solution instead of positioning against each other. That resonated in a way Emma had never managed. With Emma, every disagreement had felt like warfare. Someone won and someone lost, and the loser carried resentment that would resurface during the next conflict. With Lisa, even our disagreements felt collaborative, like we were two engineers approaching a structural problem from different angles but ultimately working toward the same goal. By October, we were officially dating, and by December, I knew this was the relationship I'd been working toward my entire adult life. Lisa understood my career ambitions because she had her own. She communicated directly instead of expecting me to read her mind. When we had our first serious disagreement about whether to spend Christmas with her family in San Francisco or mine in Ohio, we literally made a spreadsheet comparing travel costs and family expectations, then compromised on splitting the holiday. Did we just spreadsheet our way through relationship conflict? Lisa asked, laughing at the absurdity. Is that healthy or deeply weird? It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. Someone who could approach problems rationally without making them emotional warfare was exactly what I needed. I didn't hear anything about Emma for months after that casual mention from Rachel. Our lives had diverged completely, different cities, different social circles, different trajectories. I assumed she was building her new life in Portland the way I was building mine in Seattle, and I genuinely hoped she'd found whatever she'd been looking for. Then Kevin called me on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, his voice carrying that awkward tone people use when delivering news they're not sure you want. Hey man, don't know if you want to know this, but I saw something on Emma's sister's Facebook that seemed relevant. Emma's engaged apparently. Some guy named Tyler who works in finance. The post made it sound pretty serious, meeting families, planning a wedding, the whole thing. I was at Lisa's apartment helping her assemble furniture from IKEA when the call came, and I realized Kevin's news didn't create even a ripple of emotion. That's good, I said. She deserves to be happy. You're really okay with it? Kevin asked, clearly expecting more reaction. Completely. Emma and I are ancient history. I'm actually seeing someone pretty seriously myself. Yeah? Tell me about her. I looked at Lisa, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor reading furniture instructions with intense concentration, her hair piled on her head and wearing one of my old t-shirts, and felt something settle in my chest that felt like contentment. Her name is Lisa. She's a structural engineer, which sounds boring but is actually perfect because we speak the same language. She makes terrible puns about load-bearing walls and thinks my spreadsheet approach to decision-making is endearing instead of annoying. We're taking things slow, but I think this might be it. Please. You really landed on your feet. Yeah, I agreed. I really did. After Kevin hung up, I mentioned Emma's engagement to Lisa, curious how she'd react. She just shrugged and went back to studying the IKEA instructions. Good for her. Do you think piece F is supposed to attach to piece G, or are these instructions backwards? That was one of the things I loved about Lisa. She didn't treat my past relationship as competition or threat, just as history that had led me to her. Emma wasn't a specter we had to navigate around. She was just someone I used to know who'd taught me what I didn't want. Marcus called a few weeks later with less happy news about Emma, his tone cautious. So Jennifer saw something on Emma's Instagram that was kind of concerning. Apparently the engagement fell apart, and from what Jennifer could piece together from comments, the guy dumped her when he found out about her past. The divorce, the affair, how everything went down. One of Emma's friends was defending her in the comments, but it sounded messy. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. That's rough. How's she handling it? Not great, according to the posts. There was some vague stuff about toxic men and how honesty gets punished, but then she deleted everything and went private. Jennifer said one of her Portland friends mentioned Emma's been struggling professionally too. The catering company downsized and she got laid off, so she's back to job hunting. The trajectory Emma was on sounded difficult, but I also recognized it wasn't my problem to solve or even particularly my business to know about. She'd made choices that had consequences, and those consequences were still unfolding in her life the way mine were unfolding in mine. The difference being that my consequences included a thriving career and healthy relationship while hers apparently included professional setbacks and failed engagements. I hope she figures it out, I said to Marcus, and I meant it genuinely. But that's not my responsibility anymore. True, Marcus agreed. How are things with Lisa? Really good. We're talking about moving in together once her lease is up in August. Marcus laughed. Man, a year ago you were getting divorced and your ex was claiming you were financially abusive. Now you're thriving in Seattle with an engineer girlfriend. Life's funny. He wasn't wrong. The contrast between where I'd been and where I'd ended up was almost absurd, from a parking garage confrontation with my crying ex-wife to furniture assembly with a woman who appreciated my spreadsheet approach to problem solving. From character assassination campaigns to professional success in a new city. From a marriage that had imploded over an affair to a relationship built on actual communication and mutual respect. Lisa and I moved in together in September, choosing a larger townhouse in Ballard that had space for both our home offices and a garage workshop where she could pursue her woodworking hobby. We split everything 50-50, rent, utilities, groceries, and maintained separate finances while building a shared life. No resentment, no scorekeeping, just two people who'd learned from past relationships what partnership should actually look like. I proposed to Lisa on a rainy November evening after we'd spent the day visiting her parents in San Francisco, and her reaction was everything Emma's would have been scripted and performed. Lisa just stared at the ring for a moment, then at me, then started laughing and crying simultaneously. "Are you seriously proposing in your parents' driveway in the rain?" she asked. "This is so unromantic. Should I wait for better weather and staging?" Lisa grabbed my face and kissed me. Absolutely not. Yes, obviously yes. But we're telling this story differently to our families because I refuse to be the couple who got engaged in a rainy driveway. We can say it happened on the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset. Perfect. I love that you're willing to lie for aesthetic purposes. That was us, practical, honest, willing to laugh at ourselves, completely secure in what we'd built together. I didn't think about Emma at all during the engagement, during the wedding planning, during any of it. She'd become truly irrelevant to my present, just a chapter in my history that had taught me valuable lessons but held no power over my future. The wedding was in June, small ceremony at a vineyard outside Seattle with just family and close friends. Marcus served as my best man and made a toast about how far I'd come from that dark period in Denver to finding someone who actually deserved me. Lisa's father welcomed me into their family with a speech about how rare it was to find someone who valued both career ambition and partnership equally. As I stood there with Lisa's hand in mine, listening to people celebrate what we'd built together, I realized I'd never properly thanked Emma for leaving. If she hadn't blown up our marriage, I never would have moved to Seattle, never would have met Lisa, never would have learned the difference between someone who loves you conditionally based on what you provide versus someone who actually partners with you through life's complications. I heard about Emma one final time, almost 2 years after our divorce finalized, when Jennifer mentioned to Marcus that she'd seen Emma's social media showing she was back in Denver, working as a sales manager at a restaurant supply company. No mention of relationships, no lifestyle content, just occasional professional posts and photos with her family. She looked older in the photos, or maybe just tired, but also more grounded somehow, less performative, more real. "She's still asking about you sometimes," Jennifer mentioned casually. Not in a creepy way, just in that way people do when they're curious about roads not taken. "What does she want to know?" Marcus asked. "Just how you're doing, whether you're happy, whether you ever think about her." Standard ex-spouse curiosity. I didn't think about Emma except in that abstract way you think about anyone who'd once been central to your life before diverging paths made them peripheral. I hoped she'd found peace, hoped she'd continued the therapy and self-work, hoped she'd learned to handle conflict without detonating relationships. But mostly, I just didn't think about her at all. My life had moved so far beyond that Denver chapter that Emma existed more as concept than person. A reminder of what I'd escaped and how much better my life had become after learning to recognize incompatibility and walk away from it. Lisa and I bought a house in Fremont last spring, a craftsman that needed work but had good bones and room to grow into. We spent weekends doing renovation projects together, arguing good-naturedly about tile choices and paint colors, building something that was entirely ours with no ghosts lurking in the walls. Sometimes I'd catch myself being grateful for Emma's betrayal in ways that seemed perverse, grateful she'd cheated because it forced me to leave, grateful she'd made the divorce ugly because it burned away any remaining attachment, grateful she'd shown me exactly who she was so I could recognize what I actually needed in a partner. Emma didn't just lose me when she slept with David the sommelier. She lost the version of herself that might have grown into someone capable of real partnership if she'd been willing to face conflict honestly instead of detonating it. That loss was entirely self-inflicted, the direct result of choices she'd made when things got hard, and while I felt distant sympathy for the consequences she was still navigating, they weren't my responsibility to manage or even particularly my business to know. I'd moved on completely, built something better, learned what healthy partnership actually looked like. And Emma, wherever she was, whatever she was doing, would have to live with the fact that the life I was building with Lisa was exactly the life she could have had if she'd been capable of being the partner I'd needed her to be. But she wasn't, and that was okay. Some people teach you what you want. Others teach you what you absolutely don't. Emma had been the latter, and I was grateful for the lesson even if the learning had been painful. The greatest revenge, it turns out, isn't hatred or vindication, it's peace, and the ability to look at your past without feeling anything except distant gratitude that it stayed in the past where it belonged.